The alien princess was gifted to a human warrior, and she feared he'd devour her. The gift no one expected. The air was tense, silent, too silent, even the wind didn't dare to blow on the great black platform of the alien ship. Two very different groups stood facing each other. One side was tall, thin, and glowing slightly blue. These were the Exari, a proud and old alien race. On the other side stood a group of humans, heavy boots on metal floor, hands near their weapons, watching every move. The war had ended only 3 weeks ago. After years of fighting in space, both sides had finally signed peace, but peace didn't mean trust, not yet. That's when it happened. The Ari leader stepped forward. Voice calm and cold, as a sign of our trust, we offer you one of our royal blood, our princess. The humans looked at each other in confusion. Then came silence from behind the Lærards. A figure stepped forward. She was young, tall by human standards, with deep purple eyes and silver hair that floated like mist. She wore a long cloak and a crown that shimmered in the weak light. Her face was pale, but not from makeup, it was fear. Her name was Princess Zari, and in that moment she believed this was the end of her life. She had heard the stories. Humans were violent, brutal, monsters in flesh. They didn't just defeat their enemies, they ate them. At least that's what the palace guards had whispered for years. If the humans ever catch us, they said, they'll roast us like meat. So when the humans accepted the offer and one of them stepped forward to take her, Zari's legs almost gave out. He was nothing like she expected. Broad shoulders, thick arms, a face that looked more bored than angry. Short dark hair, his armor was scratched and burned, but he stood tall. His name was Commander Jack Caro, a human war hero known across many worlds, but to her he was death in human skin. When he held out his hand, she didn't take it. He didn't force her. Instead, he simply said in a calm voice, you can walk beside me or behind, your choice, princess. She looked at him, heart pounding. Aren't you going to chain me? Jake blinked. Do I need to? Zari didn't answer. She just walked behind him, shaking. Their journey to the human base was quiet. No chains, no cage, just awkward silence, and Zari watching everything with wide eyes. When they reached the base, she was given her own room, clean, warm, and with a bed that wasn't metal. It was confusing. She expected a prison, a cell, torture machines. Instead, the human left her with some food and a strange message, rest. You're safe here, safe. She didn't sleep that night. Instead, she hid in the corner, eyes on the door, expecting it to burst open. It didn't. The next day, she followed Jake carefully. She kept her distance, but watched him closely. He wasn't what she expected. He exercised every morning, doing strange moves like push-ups and sit-ups. She thought he was training to kill. He cleaned his boots and weapons, not to prepare for battle, but simply because grime slows you down. He cooked food, humming quietly, no blood, no bones, just vegetables. Zari whispered to herself, he's fattening me first, making me weak. She refused to eat. Jake noticed, you'll pass out if you don't eat something. Zari didn't reply. She stared at the tray and turned her head away. Jake sighed. Suit yourself. That night, she found a small knife in the kitchen, just enough to protect herself. She thought. She crept toward Jake's room, breathing quietly. He was asleep, or so she thought. She raised the knife, then stopped. Jake opened his eyes, not in fear, not in surprise. He just looked at her. You going to stab me or say something first? He said, sitting up. Zari froze. She expected anger, rage. Instead, Jake slowly stood, took the knife from her shaking hand and tossed it to the floor. I don't hurt people who are scared, he said softly. I was a soldier. I fought because I had to, not because I enjoy it. She looked into his eyes. There was no hunger, no monster, just tiredness. Why don't you kill me? She asked. Why would I? He replied, you're not my enemy anymore. He picked up the tray of food and handed it to her. This time she didn't run as she sat down and tasted the warm soup. Her mind spun with questions. What kind of monster feeds his enemies? What kind of human fights to protect, then offers peace? She didn't understand at him, but for the First time she wanted to, she watches him from the shadows. Princess Zari no longer believed she would be eaten, but that didn't mean she trusted the human she had lived her entire life behind crystal walls under bright stars and inside massive palaces. Servants bowed to her, guards obeyed her every command, and yet here she was walking silently behind a human warrior like a ghost. He was strange. Everything about him confused her. Each morning he woke before the sun. He didn't speak, didn't even look at her. He would walk out into the metal yard, take off his armor, and begin his strange morning ritual. Zari washed from the shadows, her long silver hair wrapped in cloth, her glowing eyes hidden behind the dark glass of the hallway. The human commander Jack Harrow would drop to the ground and begin moving his body in patterns she didn't understand. He would push the floor with his arms, then he would jump, then he would lift heavy things for no reason. She whispered to herself, this must be some kind of battle meditation or war dance, but then he would pause and breathe long deep breaths, his face calm like a mountain after a storm. No warrior she knew ever looked so peaceful. Later in the day he would eat not meat, not bones, just bread, fruit, water, sometimes fish, always clean, always quiet. He would place a second plate near her door, even if she didn't ask. Then he would walk away. At first she didn't touch the food, then she sniffed it. Then one day she ate all of it. She hated how good it tasted. Days passed. She watched him everywhere. In the training room he practiced with blades and guns, but never with rage, only focus. In the command center he listened more than he spoke. Even the other humans respected him. Some saluted, some joked with him, but no one ever raised their voice at him. Zari stayed silent, always in the background like a shadow behind glass. She didn't know why she kept watching. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe it was fear, or maybe deep down she was hoping to find proof that the monster stories were true, but she didn't. Instead she found something stranger: kindness. One night rain fell on the metal roof, cold winds slipped through the cracks of the old base. Zari sat alone in her room, wrapped in a blanket Jake had given her 2 days ago. Suddenly light footsteps outside her door. She stood quickly, heart racing. The door slid open. Jake stood there holding something wrapped in cloth. You've been sneaking around the halls, he said, eyes calm. You think I didn't notice? Zari didn't answer, her body tensed, ready to run. Jake walked in slowly and placed the cloth on the table. Then he unwrapped it. It was a book, a real one, not a data pad, not a screen, a book made of old paper. I figured you might be bored, he said. It's about stars. I heard you've siller like stories about the sky. Zari didn't move. Why are you being kind to me? She asked quietly. Jake looked at her. You're not my prisoner, you're not my enemy, you're just someone stuck in a mess neither of us asked for. He paused. And I don't like seeing people locked away. In silence Zari stared at him, trying to understand. You think I'm a person? Jake tilted his head. Aren't you? He left the room without another word. Later that night she opened the book. It was old, smelled like dust and dreams. Each page told stories of human explorers who looked at stars and wondered what was out there. Some were scientists, some were poets, some were children. They weren't monsters, they were dreamers. She read until her eyes grew heavy, and for the first time in her life Zari dreamed of humans not as beasts but as people. The next day she followed Jake to the garden tower. It wasn't really a garden, just a few plants growing in boxes under fake sunlight. Jake was on his knees, hands deep in soil. Zari spoke without thinking. Why do you grow food when your machines can make it? Jake didn't look up because this feels real. She stepped closer. Do you miss your home? He nodded. Every day. Then why are you here? Jake looked at her, then eyes tired, voice quiet. Because someone has to make sure this piece doesn't break, and maybe because I wanted to know if the Salari were really as cold as everyone said. She didn't answer because maybe the humans weren't the only ones who had heard lies. That night as she returned to her room she caught her reflection in the glass. She didn't look like a prisoner anymore. She didn't feel like one, but something inside her whispered, Don't trust them, not yet, and yet when she closed her eyes she didn't see a monster. She saw a human planting seeds in the soil, hopping something good would grow. The warrior and the firestorm. The sky above the base turned red. Not the soft red of a sunset, but the sharp, angry red of warning lights flashing across metal walls. A deep siren cried out through the halls like a beast in pain. It was loud, terrifying. Final attack. Princess Zari sat up from her reading chair, heart pounding. The book Jake gave her fell to the floor. Her glowing purple eyes scanned the room walls. Shaking, shadows dancing. What's happening? She whispered. Outside her room, boots thundered on the ground. Human soldiers shouted orders. Weapons clanked. Systems bust the peace she was just beginning to believe in shattered. She rushed into the hallway. Jake was already there, helmet under one arm, blaster in the other, calm, ready like a man who had seen death many times and would face it again without blinking. Back in D, he told her, lock the door. Stay down. Who's attacking? She asked. Panic rising, he didn't answer. Instead, he handed her a small device, a communicator. If I don't come back, press the red button that will send a distress signal to command. Zari stared at him. You're going to fight? Jake looked at her. My serious. I'm going to protect my people. She grabbed his arm without thinking. But I'm here too. He paused. I know. And then he ran outside. The sky burned. Ships had dropped from orbit without warning. Unknown symbols painted across their halls. Not humans, not Siri. A third group. Pirates, rebels, rogue mercenaries who wanted to break the new peace. They didn't care who they killed. They only wanted chaos. Jake moved like lightning. He barked orders, organized defenses, and led the charge. He fought with a mix of machine precision and raw instinct. Blaster bolts flew past his head. Explosions shook the ground. Still, he pushed forward. Zari watched it all from a security screen in her room. She didn't want to care, but she did. Then it happened. A wall near the medical bay exploded. Fire swallowed the hallway too. Soldiers went down screaming. Jake turned and ran straight toward the flames, and Zari saw it with her own eyes. He didn't run away from the danger. He ran into it. To pull out a wounded engineer, to grab a child hiding under a desk, to throw himself between fire and life, and finally to shield her, because moments later the enemy breached the inner corridor. Zari's door shattered. She barely had time to scream, but Jake was already there, arms wide, blaster in hand, shielding her body with his own. The invader shouted in a language she didn't understand. Jake responded with fire. She remembered the way his body moved. Precise, controlled, not angry, not wild. Every shot he fired was to save, to defend, not to kill for pleasure. She remembered his breathing, calm even as smoke filled his lungs, and she remembered the moment he collapsed beside her, blood soaking his sleeve. Zari dropped to her knees. No, 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 don't you die, human. Jake looked up at her, his voice low. You're not a prisoner, he whispered, bleeding. You're not alone. Then everything went black. Hours passed. The invaders were finally defeated. Human reinforcements arrived from orbit. The base was secured. Zari didn't leave Jake's side. She helped carry him to the medbay, held his hand through the pain. She didn't care what the other humans thought. For the first time in her life, she wasn't a princess of a glowing empire. She was just someone who didn't want him to die. He woke 3 days later, his arm in a sling, chest bandage, face pale but alive. Zari sat beside him, ice tired. Voice quiet. You jumped in front of me, she said. You could have died. Jake smirked. Would have ruined my week. She stared at him, confused. Why, what, why? Would you protect me? Jake looked at her for a long moment, then he said something that shook her. Because I see you, not just your crown, not just your people, you. Zari didn't reply, but her hand slowly reached out and held his. For the first time she felt no fear, only something new, something dangerous, something human. Learning each other. The fire was gone, the smoke had cleared, and the base, though damage, was still standing, but something inside Princess Zari was no longer the same. She had seen the human bleed for her, fight for her. She killed her without thinking of himself, and now she couldn't stop asking herself the question, why would a human her Supposed enemy care if she lived or died 3 days after the attack. Zari sat alone. In the garden tower, the fake sunlight flickered slightly overhead. Plants leaned toward the artificial warmth. She held a small purple flower in her fingers, twisting it slowly. That's when she heard the door open behind her. She didn't have to look, she knew it was him. Commander Jake Hare walked in slower than usual. His arm was still in a sling, and his steps were heavier, but his eyes, those calm, serious human eyes, still held their quiet strength. He sat beside her on the bench without a word for a long time. They just listened to the soft hum of the lights above and the distant sound of repair drones buzzing through the halls. Then finally Zari spoke. "Why didn't you kill me when you had the chance?" Jake turned toward her. "Why would I?" She frowned. "Because I'm your enemy. I was a gift from your enemy empire. You could have taken revenge or made a message out of me." Jake shook his head. "You're not a message, you're a person." Zari looked down at the flower in her hand. "You humans are confusing." Jake smiled slightly. "We get that a lot." Later that day, he invited her to the small library. The base didn't have much, but there were old human books, maps, even a few holograms of Earth W life. Zari picked up a photo of a tree. "Is this real?" Jake nodded. "It's called an oak, grows strong, lies long. My grandfather had one in his backyard." She ran her fingers over the image. "I've only seen trees in simulations. They're not allowed to grow ancillary ships. Too unpredictable." Jake chuckled. "You should see what squirrels do to them." Squirrels? He pulled up a hologram of a small fluffy animal with large eyes and a twitching tail. It was chewing on a shoe. Zari blinked. "Is it dangerous?" "Only if you're wearing new shoes." She laughed, a real laugh, liked, clear and surprised even to her. Jake smiled wider. It was the first time he had heard her laugh. In the following days, something strange began to happen. They started learning each other. Zari taught him a few soft words in her language, Velera, which meant peace without fear, Telleri meaning to see someone truly. Jake liked that one best. In return, he taught her Earth expressions. Cold feet didn't mean cold feet. Break a leg was somehow good luck, and butterflies in your stomach meant something very, very strange. That's not how digestion works, Zari had said, completely serious. Jake laughed so hard he dropped his coffee. They shared food too. Zari brought him an auxiliary drink made from lunar roots. It smelled like metal but tasted like fire and honey. Jake made her try chocolate. She nearly cried. "How did your species create this and not conquer the stars immediately?" "Some say we did," he joked. She smiled, licking her fingers clean. But it wasn't all jokes. Some nights they talked about the war. Zari told him how she had lost cousins in the early battles, how her father never smiled again after the humans destroyed the Northern Fleet. Jake spoke of friends he buried, of nights when the stars felt too quiet, of metals that weighed heavy. Than the wounds. They didn't cry, but the silence between them held more emotion than any tear. One evening, Zari stood at the balcony looking up at the stars. Jake joined her. "What do you see?" he asked. "My people," she said softly. "Somewhere out there, still watching, still waiting, maybe still hopping. I'll activate the recall beacon." Jake went very still. She turned to him. "Yes, I have one hidden. I was told to use it if the humans betrayed me, if I ever felt in danger." "Do you feel in danger now?" She looked at him, really looked. "No," she said. "That's the problem. I don't." She reached into her robe and held out a small black cube, the recall device. A simple press and war would return. Jake didn't reach for it. Zari threw it into the fire. They both watched it burn. That night neither of them slept. They sat near the fire, the stars above blinking in silence, and something invisible passed between them. Not orders, not peace treaties, something older, something stronger, understanding secrets of the princess. The silence between them had grown warm, not heavy, not cold, but warm, like the soft kind of quiet she scared by people who no longer needed to fear each other. For the first time since she arrived, Princess Ari walked the halls of the human base without looking over her shoulder. She no longer counted escape routes. She no longer wondered when the human would betray her, because Commander Jake Harrow never did. Every day they met, sometimes in the garden tower tending plants together, sometimes in the library where he read aloud in English and she repeated the words back with a curious accent. Sometimes they just sat in silence watching the stars blink above them. Jake didn't press her about the war anymore, and she didn't remind him that her people still called humans sky devils behind closed doors. But there was one thing she never told him, a secret she kept close to her skin, hidden in a silver band around her neck. It was small, smooth, cold, the real recall device, the one she hadn't thrown into the fire, the one that still worked. Zari stared at it late into the night, sitting alone in her room. Her fingers hovered over the button. One press and the auxiliary fleet would arrive in 2 hours. One press and every peace agreement would turn to ash. One press and she would become a hero to her people, or a traitor to something new, something human. She closed her eyes and didn't press it. But secrets don't stay silent forever. That morning Jake found her in the engine bay, staring at an old escape shuttle. You thinking of running? He asked. With a grin, she looked up, startled. No, just thinking. He tilted his head. You've been quiet lately. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Do you ever regret not finishing the war? Jake leaned against the wall. Every soldier regrets war ending. It was the first good thing we did. Zari nodded slowly. And if I told you there were people who didn't want it to end? Jake didn't flinch. I'd say those people are out there on both sides waiting. Then Zari whispered something she never meant to say out loud. I lie to you. Jake turned to her fully now. His face was calm, but something behind his eyes shifted. Zari reached into her robes and pulled out the real recall beacon. Jake stared at it. You still had it? I never used it, she said quickly. I swear I only kept it because I didn't know if I could trust you. And now she stepped forward, hands trembling. She held the beacon out to him. I'm giving it to you. He took it gently. You should have told me I was scared. Jake sighed. So was I. They looked at each other, two people from two worlds holding the key to destruction in their hands, and then, without a word, he crushed the device under his boot. Metal cracked, circuits sparked. It was gone. That night the storm came not from above but from within. The Solari Hike Council somehow had found out the beacon was destroyed. Maybe it had sent a final signal. Maybe someone had been listening, watching. Either way, Zari's private comm lit up in red, a message: high priority, return immediately. Fleet incoming. She stood in her room, frozen. Jake entered a moment later, a report in hand. Unidentified ships entering local space, he said. Your people? Zari nodded slowly. They're coming to take me home. Jake blinked. You told them? No. Then why are they coming? Because they think I'm still theirs. Hours later, the Exeler ships arrived, sleek, bright, covered in the old royal colors of silver and fire. No weapons fired yet, but their message was clear: surrender the princess or face consequences. The human base prepared for battle. Jake stood in front of the council screen, arms crossed, anger in his jaw. She's not your property, the Exeler ambassador hissed. She is of royal blood. She belongs with us. She belongs where she chooses to be, Jake replied. Zari watched it all from the shadows of the command center. Her people wanted her back. The humans were ready to fight to protect her, and she didn't know where she longed anymore. Later, Jake found her in the dark hallway near the landing bay. You don't have to stay, he said quietly, but if you leave, I'll respect it. Zari looked up at him. And if I stay? His voice was softer now. Then we'll face whatever comes next together. Her eyes burned, but not from fear, from something else, something she didn't know how to say yet. In the end, she walked toward the Y ship, then turned away from it and stood beside Jake. One choice, one moment, but everything changed. The betrayal. Nick fell hard across the stars. On the surface of the base, things looked calm, but inside, pressure built like a sealed room filling with smoke. Princess Zari should have felt safe. She had made her choice. She had stood beside the human commander Jake Harrow in front of both species. She had rejected her Empire's orders the crown's command and even her own blood, but peace doesn't last forever, especially not when powerful people feel disobeyed. It began. With a whisper, a soft click in the night, the door to her room opened without a sound. Zari stirred in her sleep, her breath steady, her mind floating in dreams of warm gardens and earth trees. She never saw the needle knot until it was already in her neck. When she woke, everything was cold metal beneath her. Blue light above her hands were bound not by rope but by shimmering magnetic cuffs that hummed against her skin, and in front of her stood a face she knew far too well. Ambassador Rise, her father's advisor, a man of poison words and colder plans. You made a mistake, Princess, he said, voice like ice over a blade. Choosing him. Zari tried to sit up, but her limbs were still weak. You drugged me, she said, her voice rough. We rescued you. Rise corrected from your own foolishness. Back at the human base, alarm screamed. Jake stood in the center of the war room, teeth clenched, fists shaking. They got in without a trace, no blast marks, no alarms, no sound. The tech officer said she's just gone. Jake slammed his hand against the table. Who let them in? No one answered. Then came the order from Human Command, a cold voice through the screen. Commander Harrow, you were responsible for the alien royal. You let her fall into enemy hands. Return to H-Cube immediately. You are relieved of duty. Jake's world tilted. He had failed, but something inside him screamed, no, this isn't over. Zari sat inside the cold Sari ship as it moved away from the planet. Rise spoke without emotion. You are no longer free. The council has decided you are to be brought back for reprogramming. Her heart stopped. What we gave you freedom once, he said. You chose weakness, you chose love. He spat the word like poison, but love is not survival. Love is betrayal. Zari's hands trembled in her cuffs. I am not yours to program, she whispered. Release smiled darkly. You were built to serve the Empire. You will again. Meanwhile, Jake was no longer listening to orders. He stole a ship, an old one, fast, quiet, not marked with any human flags. He didn't tell anyone, he didn't ask permission. He simply left because he had made a promise and he was not going to let them take her. The auxiliary ship reached orbit. Zari was led to a dark room. A seat waited for her, cold metal wires dangling like claws. She had heard the rumors, machines that rewrite memory, chemicals that erase pain and everything else. She sat in the chair, but not because she had given up, because she was waiting. Jake reached the edge of the Sillery F using old rebel code, slipped past their sensors, found the ship docked in silence. He moved through the halls like a shadow, gun in one hand, determination in the other. He didn't fire a single shot until the door opened and he saw her. Zari looked up, her eyes widened. Jake, he smiled through blood and smoke. Took me long enough. The guards raised their weapons. Jake didn't flinch. 2 shots, 1 punch, 1 kick, then silence. He ran to her, pulled the cuffs off, and caught her before she could fall. Are you real, she asked, dazed. He held her close. I better be. I broke about 50 laws to get here. They escaped through an emergency CHW. Straight into the black sky. Sea Larry ships chased them, but Jake was faster. They fired the rear guns. I was not made to shoot things. Jake laughed. You're doing great. Back at the base, Human Command was furious, but the people, the soldiers, the ones who had seen Zari change, who had watched the princess become more than just a gift, they cheered when she returned. They didn't see an alien anymore. They saw someone who had chosen them, and a human who had never stopped fighting for her. Later in the quiet garden, Jake sat beside her. His arm was bruised, his ship was half broken. He had no rank left, no medals left to earn, but he looked at her and smiled like he had everything. Zari leaned her head against his shoulder. I don't belong anywhere, she said softly. He shook his head. No, you belong where you're seen, where you're free. She closed her eyes and whispered, then maybe I belong here, not a monster, not a prize, a partner. The universe was quiet for a moment. Stars blinked gently across the black canvas of space, unaware that something impossible had just happened on a small human base at the edge of known space. A Human had gone against orders, an alien princess had defied her empire, and together they had survived, but the galaxy wasn't done watching and the powerful weren't done being angry. Princess Zari stood before the joint human salary council, her silver robe shimmered under the lights, but she wore no crown, no symbols of royalty, just a small pin on her chest. One Jake had given her a tiny blue star with one cracked edge. It meant hope through fire. Beside her stood Commander Jake Harrow. No longer in uniform, his rank had been stripped after the rescue, his command gone, but his spine remained straight and his eyes never left hers. They weren't prisoners, they were witnesses, and the galaxy had gathered to judge them. The council chambers were filled with noise. Zari is property of the crown, the auxiliary ambassador shouted. She endangered peace, barked a human admiral. She caused a diplomatic crisis. Jake disobeyed direct orders, stole a ship, destroyed Zari equipment, violated treaties. Zari stepped forward enough. Her voice was soft, but it silenced the room like thunder. She looked at the crowd, at the leaders, at the cameras broadcasting to billions across the stars. I was given away like a tool, a prize, a message, she said, not as a person, not as a daughter, and certainly not as a diplomat. No one asked what I wanted. She turned toward Jake, but he did. Jake spoke next, slow and steady. We were told to hate each other, to kill each other, to fear each other, but when the war ended, they didn't stop treating us like weapons or warnings. He glanced at Zari. She's not a warning, and I'm not a monster. The room didn't clap, not yet, but the silence had changed. It wasn't cold anymore, it was listening. Behind the scenes, protests erupted across Zari space. Young voices rose. Let her choose. On Earth, human soldiers shared clips of Zari tending to the wounded, defending the base, fighting beside them. The galaxy had seen enough war. Maybe it was time to see something else. 3 days later, the council delivered its decision. Zari would no longer be recalled. She was free to choose her own path. Jake would not be punished, but he would not return to command. He simply nodded. I've had enough command for one life. Zari looked at him, her eyes shining. So what now? Jake smiled. Now we live. They didn't return to the base. They didn't stay with the fleet. They bought a ship, barely holding together, and began traveling the edge of the galaxy, helping in where they could, fixing what was broken, not as soldier and princess, but as partners in one colony. They stopped a gang from taking over a farming dome in another. They helped translate an ancient alien language for a lost species. They were never invited to banquets, but they were always welcomed at dinner tables. People began to tell stories of a human with calm eyes and quiet fire, and an alien princess who laughed, now really laughed, and wore a blade on her hip instead of a crown. Some said they were in love, some said they were heroes, some said they were traitors. They never answered. They just kept going. One night aboard their ship, Zari stood at the window staring at a new planet below. Jake handed her a cup of tea, sat beside her, said nothing. She finally spoke. Do you remember the first thing I ever said to you? He chuckled. You asked if I was going to chain you. No, she corrected. I asked if you were going to eat me. They both laughed long and loud. Zari wiped her eyes. And now look at us. Jake raised his cup to not getting eaten. She raised hers too, to choosing our own story. Far across the galaxy, in hidden rooms and high towers, rulers and generals still plotted, but out here on the edges, two people from opposite worlds had proved something louder than war. Understanding is stronger than fear. Kindness is harder than violence, and no one, no matter where they were born, deserves to be treated like property. She was no longer the princess who had been given away. He was no longer the soldier who followed orders. They were not symbols, not monsters, not prizes. They were partners, and the galaxy would never forget their story.